Back in 2022, we did a video about the whitest states in the US. It was followed by videos about all the major races the US has to offer. One of the most common emails I get about these videos are people wondering, what are the next 5? What are the next 10? So they want like 20 of them. So today, I'm going to give you a list of the top 20 whitest states. The top 10 also had a few changes since we did that video 2.5 years ago. So here's a totally unbiased list of states with the highest percentage of white people in the US. Just to be clear, we're talking about overwhelmingly white populations here. So if you're looking for diversity, you might want to take a detour. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 20, Minnesota. Welcome to Minnesota, where the weather is as frosty as the people's social skills. With a high rate of the population identifying as white, it's clear that Minnesotans love their Scandinavian roots, but they weren't the first Europeans to make it to the land of 10,000 lakes. Like so many states in the Midwest and the South, the first Europeans to really get around Minnesota were French fur traders, followed by a whole bunch of Irish dudes, German guys, and English. Followed in the 1850s by a bunch of dudes named Bjorn. And that's sort of where the state takes its identity. I mean, even their major football team in the state is called the Vikings. They have a whole lot of people living in that state with Scandinavian roots, and as we all know, most Scandinavians are about as white as liquid paper, especially back in the 1850s. So if you're into big box stores, ice fishing, and passive-aggressive Midwestern politeness, this is your spot. White folks in Minnesota make up 82.6% of the population. That's about a white population of 5.7 million, according to the US Census. Number 19, Rhode Island. Rhode Island, tiny but mighty. This state clearly has some serious white dominance. Despite being the smallest state in the Union, Rhode Island packs a punch in its own way, with its Italian-American influence thrown in for good measure. But hey, don't let the size fool you. It's still got more people than you'd expect crammed into this little corner of the country. Rhode Island is in New England, so in the early days it was a lot of English, a lot of Irish, a lot of Germans. And Dutch, too, for a kicker. The percentage of white folks in Rhode Island is 82.8%, and their whole entire white population makes up 1.1 million residents. Number 18, Indiana. Indiana, where the corn is plentiful and so are the white folks. This state will give you all the Hoosier hospitality you need. That is like a tongue twister. You may not know it, but I had to say that like 6 times just now. But Indiana, they are very hospitable. So they're nice people. Plus, there's basketball, which is about as white as it gets, right? Maybe not. I was thinking ice hockey when I started to say that. But really, who needs diversity when you got basketball courts everywhere and a whole lot of flat land? 84% of Indiana's population is white, meaning they have about 6.9 million white people living in the state. South Dakota. South Dakota might be famous for Mount Rushmore, but let's be honest, it's mostly famous for having a whole lot of white people. The state's population could easily make up a best of list for beige clothing and flannel shirts. And don't get me started on how many times you'll hear "you betcha" in South Dakota. I met a guy in a military bar one time and I was talking to him. He's an African-American gentleman and I asked him where he's from. He said, South Dakota. And I was all, really? And he goes, I bet you didn't think there was any black folks up there, did you? I was all, to be honest, I didn't think there was. He's all, yeah, there's like 10 of us. 84.2% of South Dakota's population identifies as white, which means it's about 900,000. 16, Oregon. Oregon is home to coffee shops, hiking trails, and an overwhelming white population. The liberal-leaning state is full of people who are deeply committed to their organic, gluten-free lifestyles. But if you look hard enough, you might catch a glimpse of diversity, even if you have to hike up a mountain for hours and hours to find it. Now, this was many years ago, but it kind of paints a picture of, where Oregon was. First of all, in the 1800s, their constitution said this was going to be a white-only state. Yeah, in 1857, Oregon bans both slavery and new black residents to Oregon. It makes it illegal for blacks to own real estate, make contracts, vote, or use the legal system. Not very inviting. Now, obviously, that was close to 200 years ago, but that's how they started, and it takes a while for them to catch up. I mean, hell, in the 70s when they filmed Animal House down in Eugene, they didn't have enough black folks in the city for a scene they were filming. They had to bust them in from Portland. White folks make up 85.9% of Oregon's population. That's about 4.2 million residents. Number 15, Kansas. In Kansas, you'll find more wheat fields than you can shake a stock at. Sure, it's flat, but at least the cornfields are wide enough to give you some time to think about your existence as you stare off into the horizon while listening to country music, of course. So the early European settlers in Kansas were, for the most part, from New England. They'd lived in New England a while, maybe worked their way west, and ended up in Kansas. After the Civil War, many Central Europeans moved to Kansas for the promise of jobs, building railroads, and free land. 85.9% of Kansas population is white folks, and the white population is 2.9 million residents. Number 14, Colorado. Colorado, where the mountains are high, the air is thin, and the white people are everywhere. You'll find a lot of folks here that are probably just really into yoga, or they want to start a brewery in their garage. That happens a lot here. Now, the first Europeans that landed in Colorado, or worked their way up to Colorado, were Spanish conquistadors, who claimed the southern part of the state in 1598. The Spanish established a trade route between the Spanish and the Native American settlements. The French claimed part of it in 1682, and then of course during the Louisiana Purchase, that's when the United States got a hold of Colorado. Now that wasn't the entire part of Colorado. Some of Colorado came from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was in 1850, and part of Colorado was actually part of the Republic of Texas at the time. Very interesting stuff if you're into that. If you're not into that, I could just give you a story and say, the United States showed up and it never existed before we got here. We just turned it into a state. But of course, there's a lot more that goes into it. Some people I know didn't even know Colorado existed until the Denver Broncos started playing there. White folks make up 86.2% of Colorado's population. The entire white population of Colorado is 5.9 million residents. Number 13, North Dakota. North Dakota, where the population is small, but the percentage of white folks is large. It's a place where you could stare at endless miles of prairie, drink beer, and pretend that you aren't wondering why this place is so empty. North Dakota is so empty that the welcome sign actually says, "Don't worry, we're surprised you're here too." You'll love it here if you're into cold weather and really long stretches of nothing. This is the type of state where if your wife leaves you, you have to watch her drive away for like 3 hours. 86.6% of North Dakota's population is white folks, and the white population is 783,000 residents. Number 12, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, land of cheese, beer, and a whole lot of white people. If you enjoy a good bratwurst and don't mind getting your hands sticky with cheese curds, this is a place to be. I was in a bar in Madison, Wisconsin years ago. I forget what I'd ordered for food, but I asked them if they had any hot sauce, or I think I asked them what kind of hot sauce they had, and the girl looked at me and said, "What's hot sauce?" She was joking, but it's not something a lot of people use in Wisconsin, it seems like. That's just my own experience, not, discrediting the hot sauce scene in Wisconsin. 86.6% of Wisconsin's population is white folks. Same as North Dakota. The white population in Wisconsin is 5.9 million residents. Number 11, Kentucky. Kentucky, home to bourbon, horse racing, and millions of white people. If you're a fan of mint juleps, bluegrass music, and keeping things as simple as possible, this state's got your back. And while you're here, don't forget to enjoy the real Kentucky experience, talking about basketball while you sip whiskey. 86.9% of Kentucky's population is white, and the white population is 4.5 million residents. Number 10, Nebraska. Nebraska may not be the first place you think when you're planning your vacation, but if you're into vast plains and an overwhelming number of white people, it could be the spot for you. It's one of those places where everything is just, flat and boring. Now, I'm not saying there isn't anything to do in this state, but I do know that the state's top 10 places to visit includes a gas station. Traffic in Nebraska usually includes a couple tractors. White folks make up 87.5% of Nebraska's population. That's about 2.1 million people. Number 9, Montana. Montana's where the air is thin, the mountains are stunning, and they have more hermits per capita than any other state in the union. This is a state that's perfect for those who want to get away from it all and pretend to be a cowboy for a weekend or a year, however long you want to do it. They'll let you. If you enjoy wide open spaces and a lack of neighbors, then Montana's your place. Just be ready to meet a lot of folks that were born in the wrong century. In the last 3 years, Montana has jumped 1.2% in the percentage of white people they have making up their population. But right now, 88.7% of their population is white, and the white population is about 1.1 million residents. Number 8, Iowa. Iowa, the land of cornfield, and you guessed it, a lot of white people. It's a state that gives off major peaceful small town energy, where everyone knows everyone else's business. You won't find much excitement in Iowa, a lot like Nebraska and Kansas, but you will find plenty of people that wave at you from their front yard. And they will be white, more often than not. The first American settlers to move to Iowa in 1833 primarily were from Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Indiana, and Kentucky, and Virginia. They settled along the Mississippi River. Right around that time, the Mississippi River was a major corridor for trade. I mean, in reality, it still kind of is. Has anyone out there taken one of those river cruises up the Mississippi? I don't know if I'm going to do that. It seems a little too boring. 89.8% of Iowa's population is white folks. That's about 3.2 million residents. Number 7, Utah. Now, this was a change from the last time we did this video 2.5 years ago. Iowa was at number 7 and Utah was at number 8. Utah gained a lot of white folks while Iowa lost some. Utah, where Mormons thrive and 9 out of 10 people are white. With its snow-capped mountains and almost eerie sense of purity in the air, it's the perfect place for anyone who's really into outdoor activities and, well, avoiding diversity at all costs. The real charm of Utah is that it's all about family values and maybe a few too many polygamous jokes. Honestly, that's the most worn out joke there is in the world, next to dating your cousin in Arkansas. The first Europeans to arrive in Utah were actually the Spanish in the mid-16th century. Now, the first non-indigenous people to permanently settle Utah were the Mormons, led by Brigham Young. They established Salt Lake City in 1847. The Mormons were fleeing persecution and marginalization in the United States and traveled to Utah via the Mormon Trail. You know, they did it by wagon train, just like everyone that came out west back in the day. The only difference was most people were heading to California and Oregon and Washington. The Mormons, I guess, got tired after going through the Rockies and said, close enough. As time went on, they had other Europeans that moved into the towns and cities that were springing up. A lot of them weren't up for living on the prairie or in the desert. They moved to the cities and towns. 90% of Utah's population is white. That's about 3.4 million white people living in Utah. Number 6, Wyoming. Yes, Wyoming sits right where it did in the last video. I still think there's a surge that's going to happen in Wyoming in the next handful of years. And when I say a surge, they might grow by 20,000 people in 5 or 10 years. I mean, they're averaging a growth of about 10,000 every 10 years. So we'll see how that pans out. I just think it has a lot to offer. It's affordable. It's a beautiful state, and it's got a lot of open spaces. And eventually, America's going to discover Wyoming. The locals won't like it. In Wyoming, it's clear that if you're looking for diversity, you might as well look elsewhere because Wyoming doesn't have it. But hey, the state's got some serious charm. Wide open spaces, cattle ranches, and just the right amount of frontier spirit. Biggest challenge? Finding another person on a lonely stretch of highway. This is another state that's very popular with people that just want to get away from people. Got a big population of hermits. 92.3% of Wyoming's population is white, and that's up a little over 1% from the last video. And their white population, about 584,000 residents. Number 5, Idaho. Idaho, where the potatoes are abundant and the white people, well, are abundant as well. It's a state where being local means knowing the best spots to buy fresh potatoes and avoiding eye contact with anyone who doesn't look like you. It's also a state that loves the outdoors, which means you could be alone in the wild and think how much you fit in here. Idaho's been one of the more popular states to move to over the last decade and a half, and it surprises me that they haven't gained much diversity. I guess it's only catching on with certain types of folks. White folks make up 92.6% of Idaho's population. That's about 2.2 million people. Number 4, New Hampshire. New Hampshire, a place where people enjoy their quiet and small town life. It's like Vermont's quieter, more reserved cousin. They both like skiing, hiking, and being left alone. And New Hampshire even manages to throw in a little political independence, making it one of those places where everyone agrees to disagree in a very polite way. Now, they've got an interesting history of who settled the place. They actually tracked it down to some of the people. The first one was Captain John Mason, a London merchant who received the land grant from the Council of New England in 1622. He named the area New Hampshire after his home county in England. Then they had another man named David Thompson. He was a Scotsman who settled near the mouth of the Piscataqua River at a place called Little Harbor, which is now the town of Rye. I mean, all of New England was settled by people from the British Isles for the most part. New Hampshire's population is 92.6% white, making up about 1.4 million residents. Number 3, West Virginia. This one's a little strange because most people assume that West Virginia has the highest percentage of white residents. It's not the case. And it hasn't been. They're always in the top 5. I mean, this is how it's been for decades and decades. But no, they're here at number 3 this year. West Virginia's where mountains are as old as time, and the residents always seem to click Caucasian when applying for a job. The state gives off a major rugged individualist vibe, with a healthy dose of we like it just the way it is. If you're looking for Appalachian charm and maybe have a secret desire to live in a log cabin, this is the place for you. I've gone to West Virginia a few times. Their stats are horrible in most cases, but it is a beautiful state with wonderful people. 92.8% of West Virginia's population is white folks. Their white population is 1.8 million. Number 2, Vermont. This is one of the first times I've done a video where whatever the subject is, Vermont and New Hampshire aren't right next to each other on the list. West Virginia's between them. Vermont, where the people are more white than the snow, and the percentage of them being white is the same percentage of people that own cell phones in the United States. This is a state where you find a bunch of hippies, organic farmers, and people who are really into maple syrup. If you ever want to live in a place that could give you a perfect Instagram picture every time you step outside, Vermont is what you're looking for. Vermont is beautiful. I think it's one of the most beautiful states we have. I mean, there's a handful that I think this about. Oregon, Colorado, California, New Mexico, even though I hate the desert, still beautiful. Vermont's right up there with all of them, and Pennsylvania. 93.8% of Vermont's population is white. That's about 647,000 residents. All right, before we get to number 1, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel. It's free and it just helps out the channel. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Maine. Surprise, surprise, Maine again is the whitest state we have. Probably because it's the closest place to where all those Europeans came when they settled the United States. And it is the ultimate state in terms of white folks. Maine is undeniably the land of lobsters, lighthouse, and lack of any real diversity. If you're into coastal living, crab cakes, and waves of whiteness, this is your paradise. But hey, at least you can look out at the ocean and pretend that there's a whole world out there, even if you feel like you're the only one in it. 93.9% of Maine's population identifies as white, giving them a white population of about 1.4 million. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.